'Twas the week before Christmas. Happy holiday, friends. It's a Friday. It is the week before Christmas. There's not much going on, but there's some saucy things related to Starfield, Copilot, and everything else. And the questions are filled and juicy this week. So hopefully everybody had like a really legitimately good 2025. This will be the last normal podcast for the year. There won't be a podcast next week because Christmas is on Thursday and nothing's happening on Friday. Unless something goes sideways, then maybe there will be. And then sometime I'll do my annual that I do every year, like the What I Use video podcast of all the whatever tech that's changed and throughout this setup and everything else and beyond. And so hopefully everybody had a good 2025. I cannot believe this year is already over. Let's dive into the little bit of news. There's a decent amount of gaming news and then the questions and let's wrap it up here, friends. So first off this week, Microsoft's full throttle, head first, no going back maneuvers into the world of Copilot continue. So this made a lot of headlines this week that LG pushed out a software update that pinned a Copilot app to an LG TV and you couldn't remove them. Now LG has come out and said, they will push another update that allows you to remove that. But it's like, nobody wants this. Nobody's like, I wish I had Copilot. Nobody has said that. Here's like a little, I don't know if this is true, but we're gonna hypothesize here for a second. Like, why would this happen? Here's a guess. I bet Microsoft had a deal with LG to put cloud gaming icons on their TVs, right? That like they have these with other vendors. This is not unusual. And I wonder if Microsoft said, you know what? Let's use Copilot instead of cloud gaming for this contract instead of the Xbox stuff. I genuinely somewhat wonder if that was why this happened. I don't know if that means that Xbox Cloud Gaming just isn't doing well on TVs directly. It wouldn't surprise me. It's not a niche thing, but it's a very, I'd say, undersold feature. And I don't know if people actually really understand like how that all functions. But it would not surprise me if Microsoft had a contractual agreement with LG to put some sort of app or icon on their whatever start screen, and they swapped it for Xbox. I don't know. That's just speculation. Either way, Copilot is there, and it's a thing. Anyways, if you do have an LG TV, I do highly recommend getting a Pi-hole and then blocking your TV from ever, and I mean ever, connecting to the internet. There is no need for it. Connect up a third-party Apple TV, whatever, Google, Android box of your choosing, a Roku device, a Fire Stick, or something else, although some of those do have ads in them as well. But at least you have a little bit more control. Don't let friends let their TVs connect to the internet, is what I'm trying to say. So also speaking of Copilot here, there's like the tide is turning, I think, on Copilot. I think Microsoft has flown a little too close to the sun because we all know they're shoving Copilot into literally everything and everywhere. This is my personal email, my Outlook.com account. When you open a message, you conveniently have two different Copilot buttons. Why? One takes up the entire horizontal width, and then you have the permanent one in the top right corner. Why? Yeah, like the annoying part about the summary by Copilot is that it pushes down the information that I'm actually trying to get to. So I now have to scroll further. Someone will say, yeah, it's a small little bar. It's not a big deal. Don't have two Copilot buttons. Pick one Copilot button to rule them all. And finally on the Copilot rant, The Verge actually did an excellent write-up where they looked at the Copilot TV ad that Microsoft is running and pretty much realized like none of this actually works. It's worth a read. I will link to it down in the description. But the Copilot ad, it's one of those things like, yeah, maybe this kind of could sort of work, but it doesn't really play out that way in reality. And it's overselling what AI is currently capable of doing, especially when it comes to Copilot. So there you go. There's the Copilot stuff for the week. Onto the gaming side, because that's where there's just Corden had a pretty good week here of solid news. But anyways, we'll dive into those, and also again links will be in the description. So there's been some changes in the org structure within Xbox. So the CFO of Xbox, of Microsoft Gaming, I should say, will be stepping into a new role over at ZeniMax, and then Xavier, I cannot pronounce his last name, who currently works as the corporate vice president of Microsoft Gaming, will be elevated into that CFO position. And so a lot of questions have come into like, hey, what does this mean? Like, why is this happening? What is really going on? We don't know the full picture here, but the fact that Tim was pushed over into a studio, some are saying like, hey, that's kind of seems like a step down, but he's going over into a similar style position, a COO over at ZeniMax. I suspect that potentially this might be a more of a like, hey, they need to like keep their budgets in control. You don't send a CFO somewhere where they aren't spending enough money. It's usually where they're spending too much money, or it very well could be like a deck chair shuffling just because they needed a switch up. But we will see what happens. But my personal opinion here is that they're probably trying to get more financial scrutiny over at ZeniMax, and Tim said, hey, I can go over there and do that, and I can be the COO of that company and try to make those things happening and just keep costs better controlled at the end of the day. That is my interpretation of all of these changes here. So more things that are happening. Xbox did not do a Wrapped this year, which their justification for this is like, hey, our 20th anniversary is coming up, we'll do it then. Which is fine. I understand this. I understand the logic here, but like these are two different things in my opinion. So the 2025 Wrapped, which is made, we all know what that means at this point, is your 2025, right? That's like this year and everything else. The 25th anniversary would be like your entire Xbox career, all the way back. I can't imagine that it's a massive lift anymore. Like once you've done the process once and twice, that it should be relatively easy. Whatever. I don't know if they didn't have budget or something, but they're not doing that. Maybe I'm completely overlooking this, but anyways, don't expect one of those to be happening. Then the other big news of the week is what is happening with Starfield. According to Jess Gordon, it is coming to PlayStation 5 in 2026. This really is not a surprise at the end of the day. It really shouldn't be. And if you're a fan of Starfield, you should probably be pretty happy about this. If you want to understand why you should be happy, is that for Microsoft to justify continued investment into Starfield, it needs to continue to make money. And if it's not continuing to make money, then they're not going to continue to develop content. And by putting it on the PlayStation 5, that is a scenario or a way that they can make money, and that will allow continued investment into the game itself. So that is going to be a big change. I fully expect this to happen. I have no reason to doubt it at this point. As we all know, the new trajectory that Microsoft has been taking Xbox has been taking these past couple years. This is just the way that it is. And also on the gaming news, oops, that's a little off center there for you on the video side. Let's just drag that guy up there and make you just a little bit bigger, and there we go. So a new report is out talking about hardware sales, and not just Xbox sales, but all hardware sales were down pretty heavily for November. And so a new report from Circana says that the game industry just had its worst November for console dollars since 2005. So there you go. Xbox Series S and X console sales are down 70% year over year, and PS5 is down 40%, and even Switch 2 sales were down 10%. We all know why. We all know why. Now, console sales may be down. I'd be curious what the revenue numbers are, because they're not charging less for consoles. We all know that. And with everything going on with RAM pricing, like NVIDIA coming out saying like, we're going to cut some consumer GPU supply probably for the next year, things are not getting cheaper. And so consoles go up. People aren't, but like, why would you, if you don't have a gaming console right now, if you have no console, why would you go spend more money than at launch for a console that is at the end of its life cycle? Now, I still love the Series S and X. They're great little machines. They are expensive for what they are now. They weren't expensive for what they were when they launched, but this many years later, post-release, there's not a lot of value there. I shouldn't say there's no value, but there's not a lot of value. So, yeah, sales being down, no one's surprised. All right, let's jump into the questions, because there are some good questions of the week. Oh, why are we a little off scroll here? Let's see. All right, hopefully I didn't screw anything up. All right, now I got to get it on this other display. I got to like reorganize how I do this, because I have too many displays that I cannot see all at the same time. All right, here we go. First question comes in. I believe it's from Matabear. Is 2026 the year of Linux? So there was a great Linus Torvalds interview, I think it was recently, where he said he developed Linux to be the desktop PC operating system. And it has done everything but that. It won mobile. It is winning like data centers and everywhere else. It did everything but win the desktop. I just thought that was a little hilarious. So it already is the year of Linux. It's just not the year of the Linux desktop. However, we'll see what happens with the Steam machine. I'm not expecting Steam machines to kind of go all crazy overnight and take over the market and everything switch in a blink of an eye. I don't think that's a reality, but we will see. Supposedly, we're getting Half-Life 3 announcement by the end of the year. for that, but we'll see. That's what the rumors suggest at this point. So we'll see. Mr. PKI says, can you really save money by building your own gaming PC versus a great Alienware box? Well, you got to be careful which Alienware box you buy because some of them had cooling issues for a while. I think that has been resolved. Now the question is, can you save money? This is a loaded question for this time because at one point, yeah, you typically would because you're not paying for the labor costs, the shipping costs, and all. Well, you might pay for shipping costs to get your parts and products and everything else. However, with RAM prices being so volatile, and I mean, if it's not RAM, it's your GPUs and everything else, it is harder to build a value-based box where you're saving money. Now, the turnkey solution with an Alienware or Main Gear or any of these Falcon Northwest, there's tons of these companies out there, is that you don't put it together and you have a warranty and everything else. And so that all costs money too. And so I believe you can still build probably a better box dollar for dollar, but you have to know how to build a gaming PC. And you also, more importantly, know how to support and troubleshoot. And if you don't like doing those things, sometimes just swiping the credit card and getting a pre-built is not a bad way to go. Sydney2K says, no questions this week, just best of holidays for you and your folk and for all those watching lists. Same to you, Sydney2K. Same to you. I actually had to grab a drink in between those two questions. It's a little early on this end, and I was a little raspy, if you will. Oh, Mr. Marty, I cannot pronounce this name. Mr. Marty Marty Yoshaka. We'll go with that. Hi, Brad. Considering all the AI integrations into everything, part price hikes, consoles release and delays, and everything else going on, maybe it's just me, but it feels like we're on the verge of the computing dark age, where computing and games will become too expensive for most consumers. Do you think there's light at the end of the tunnel, or do you think we should start bracing for a pretty bad computing climate for the remainder of the last decade? Well, we've already gone through this, actually, if you think about it. The whole reason consoles exist, like gaming consoles, was because computing was too expensive and too confusing at the end of the day, right? You used to have to, I remember standing in Best Buy reading PC specs and wondering if my device would be capable of doing those sort of things. And a console was just that. It was just, you just bought this box, you bought the game, you knew it would work, you know you'd get great performance. And so the part of my brain is like, we should actually be like on the cusp of like seeing a resurgence of consoles, but consoles no longer sell at a loss and then recover on game sales. And so Dark Ages is probably not the correct enunciation or thought process, because on the other side, the barrier to building great games is lower than ever. It continues to be lower and continues to be easier. So I suspect that we're going to continue to get quality games that will come out of the shadows and everything else. Not necessarily, I'm not saying Call of Duty will be bad or Battlefield 7 will be bad or the next Bungie title Marathon will be bad. But for indie developers, the barrier to entry continues to be lower and they can create higher quality games. So I continue to believe that your current hardware will actually see a longer life cycle because these quality games will come out and the cost of upgrading will be too much. And so you'll just sit on what you got, because at the end of the day, it's not worth, like, I would love a 4090 or more importantly a 5090 or something like that just for the VRAM so I could run larger local models at home. But like, my God, I am not spending $2,000, $2,500 on a GPU. No way. That is way too much. I know they're great cards, but like, got mouths to feed, got Christmas. Like, it's too much. I don't know about Dark Ages because there's so many good games coming and there's so many good games out. But it might be Dark Ages for the hardware purchasing and upgrade cycle, at least for a little bit here. Editirney 6076 says, happy holiday, Brad. Are there any stories or trends that you're keeping an eye on for 2026? For 2026, it's going to come down to hardware pricing, because here's what I'm really interested in. We know that next-gen consoles for both Xbox is coming in various flavors and form factors, and PlayStation is also walking down that line. We also have Steam hardware coming. However, as we just talked about, hardware is getting very expensive. So what's the pricing going to be on this hardware stuff? Because if the hardware pricing is too high, then we are going to stagnate into the current generation and not see a mass migration. We already really saw that a lot from like Xbox One, PlayStation 4 to 5, Xbox One to Series S and X. It took a lot longer than historical trends would typically allow for to make that migration. If the next gen consoles are expensive, it is only going to slow down that timeline of people moving. So that is going to be the trend to watch is like, how much is hardware actually going to cost in 2026? Because that will be a big deciding factor on many levels. People are going to say, well, Brad, that's fine. The current consoles can do lots of great things and everything else. Here's the downside to that. The new consoles, we'll just focus on Xbox for a second, will have new graphics technology, FSR updates, and everything else. If you want developers to take advantage of that, they need to have a population base that is utilizing that technology. Why spend all the money to make your game FSR, whatever version, latest version is compliant, if only a small subsample will be able to utilize it? We deal with this at my job every day. So I built an app that runs on the NPU. How many devices out in the real world actually have an NPU? Very small. So shipping and supporting that is very expensive versus the return that you might get for supporting that functionality. So that is going to be the trend to be watching for here. And VDW04 says, "Hi Brad, been watching you for a while." Well, thanks for watching for a while, but this is my first time asking. This is my first time answering your question. If you've covered this, I just don't happen to remember. But with regards to PC hardware prices going through the roof because of AI, do you think this could be an excuse for various companies to push for services? Oh, I like this. Where you have to rent to use computer hardware through the cloud. Regardless if the bubble pops or not, companies have already been buying out all the RAM and SSDs and everything else and already have the infrastructure to pull off this sort of software as a service model. So this already exists. This exists heavily in the corporate space through virtualized thin clients and everything else like that. The question becomes, does this become something that happens in the world of gaming? Here's the challenge. So unlike in the world of corporate computing where Microsoft sells virtual desktops, you can go log into a tenant and have a Windows instance in the cloud that is relatively performant. The problem we're going to see here is hardware latency. Gaming is extremely sensitive to user input and beyond, right? Those sorts of, you have first-person shooters and you have even just local shooters or time-sensitive games. So hardware in the cloud, that latency exists at a higher rate than it does locally. That is a very obvious statement. That does not impact typically people who are working in spreadsheets, or if you're a developer or a videographer and you're using that extra cloud compute to do rendering where it's like, I just press this button, I walk away for 20 minutes and come back, as opposed to the person who's playing Call of Duty, Battlefield 6, whatever, League of Legends. Like, that latency is extremely important. So the only way that this truly works is if they can do background tasks and offload it from your GPU to eke out extra performance, in which my personal opinion right now is that's not good enough to justify. Because if you are downloading textures, again, like the background task could be like, hey, upscale the textures in the background. That's great. That is certainly a thing. But what did you just do? You just increased your bandwidth usage significantly. And so again, if you're playing a competitive shooter and you're downloading higher res textures in the background, that again impacts performance in some capacity, especially when it comes to latency online. So it's not a bad thought. I just don't think that we have these solutions figured out, because people will say, well, look at GeForce Now. That is a viable option. Yes, it is. However, we haven't gotten any like real hard concrete numbers if these cloud gaming services are actually businesses or just novel. And what I mean by that is, like, can you trash all gaming PCs and consoles and just go to GeForce Now or Xbox Cloud Gaming or any of the other services? We all know that answer is no. And so until those services figure out how to deal with the latency and make it better than local performance, you're not going to get the high-end user. And if you're not getting the high-end user, those are typically, as known in the industry, as the whales, are the people who outspend the traditional amount. And then you're like entering in a world of lower margin and lower return. I kind of got off on that on the side, but we have the capability, and by we, I mean the infrastructure exists, but there's still the problem of physics, and the physics being that they have to get that data and that latency to you. Now, if they can make it so you can play all in the cloud and you're just renting it and you're just opening a browser, which I guess that does exist, but again, you're still dealing with some latency, and the people who are gaming and want the highest level of performance, it's just it's a non-starter at this point. But it doesn't mean we can't get there. I just don't see it happening right around the corner, if that makes sense. Because this is not a new concept, but nobody has been able to execute it in a way that would justify people paying for it. Not even many years ago, it might have been about a year ago or 2 years ago, I got pitched all the time to read ads on this about a new service that did something very similar to that. And as you know, I didn't do it. So I don't know. Maybe you don't know, but I never did. Anyways, awesome question. Really appreciate that one. So there you go, guys. Like, that's 2025. Like, crazy to think that the year has pretty much come. We have the holidays next week, and then we have the New Year's, and then we're into 2026, which I will flub up many times trying to make that transition into the new year. But anyways, my friends, I hope you had a good year. I hope you have a wonderful holiday, and I hope you keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this podcast is me.